All right, let's get started. First and foremost, thank you all for joining tonight's webinar on nature-based solutions on this wonderful, beautiful night on Wednesday, and how these nature-based solutions are used in Southborough. This meeting is being recorded and playing live on YouTube, so the recording will be available on the town's YouTube page moving forward, and I will post the slides on the MVP section of the Conservation Commission page. For those who don't know me, my name is Melissa Danza, and I am the conservation agent for the town of Southborough. And the Conservation Commission is primarily charged with overseeing implementing work that's jurisdictional under the State Wetlands Protection Act, our Southborough Wetlands Bylaw, and our Stormwater and Erosion Control Bylaw. And this presentation is in conjunction with a grant received under the MVP Action Grant Program. All right, so just quickly, some housekeeping items. Everyone who has joined has entered as an attendee. So if you have any questions throughout the PowerPoint, please feel free to use the raise hand feature on Zoom, or I have also enabled the Q&A chat feature. So feel free at any time, put your questions in there. As I am running this presentation by myself, please be patient. If I don't see your hand or question right away, any questions that I don't answer during the presentation, I will come back to at the end. And I'll also have my email and contact information at the end of the presentation. So if you have additional questions, or if I can't answer the question you have tonight, please send me an email and I will get back to you. So what we're going to be covering tonight is what exactly the MVP program is, an overview of the MVP Action Grant and their program, and the impervious surfaces data layer that we created, impervious surfaces and their implications to climate change, and nature-based solutions. What is the purpose, benefits, and how to implement them, and examples of these nature-based solutions in Southborough, both commercially and residentially. All right, so the MVP program was created and implemented by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, or the EOEEA. In September of 2020, Southborough was designated as an MVP community, and this was after completing the Community Resilience Building planning process that was funded through an MVP planning grant. And the town's required 25% match was completely covered through staff hours. And this grant conveniently was also in conjunction with a grant from FEMA that was retrieved and applied and granted through the emergency management team, specifically Neil Spacey through the fire department, to update our local hazard mitigation plan as they go hand in hand. And being an MVP community requires annual yearly progress reports due by June 30th by the MVP coordinator, who is myself. So I'll be submitting that in the coming weeks. And that outlines any work we completed towards the goal of increased climate change resiliency. And this MVP program is primarily to provide support for cities and towns to identify climate hazards, assess vulnerabilities, and develop action plans to improve resilience to climate change. And the main part of this initial program through the planning process, it required a meeting with community stakeholders. And this was done in March of 2020, about a week before the pandemic hit. So we got it in just in time. And these stakeholders included board and committee members, local businesses, utility companies, builders, MWRA, DCR, private and public schools, and land trusts. And it helped us to identify those top hazards, vulnerabilities, and areas of concerns from those who reside or do business in Southborough, those stakeholders. And it was able to provide us top recommendations to increase resilience. Like I said, it provided the funding update for the local hazard mitigation plan, so we can better adapt to the emergency management side as well. And the summary of findings from that planning process can be found on the Conservation Commission website, so feel free to check that out at any time. In the MVP Action Grant, so after you become an MVP community and you keep up on your yearly requirements, you are eligible to submit for an MVP Action Grant which we did for the first time this year. So these grants are available so that cities and towns can implement priority climate adaptation actions that were identified by the community with a preference to items that include or prioritize nature-based solutions. Eligible projects under this grant includes vulnerability and risk assessments, education and outreach, local bylaw updates, redesign and retrofit projects of stormwater systems, energy resilience strategies, climate safety and climate vulnerabilities, nature-based hazard reductions, acquisition of land, ecological restoration, and habitat management to increase resiliency. So most recently, we submitted an application in May of 2021. And subsequently were awarded the grant in July of 2021. So the award was for the town to hire a vendor for the creation of an impervious surfaces data layer. This means that from recent high resolution aerial imagery, the consultant that we hired was able to outline all impervious surfaces within Southborough, to the best of their ability. So we are now able to determine the amount of impervious per parcel on both the commercial and residential side. And this data resides in a GIS layer that the town can continuously update, and we're working towards hopefully making this available for daily public viewing. And this data layer will help us better understand the links between water quality and health and impervious surfaces, especially because a lot of our development and impervious surfaces reside around the Sudbury Reservoir, which is a backup drinking water supply. So the information provided will be able to help us more easily and accurately determine areas for potential improvement or reduction of impervious surfaces. And a presentation on the final information from that GIS layer will be presented next Wednesday at 5:30. So keep a lookout for that Zoom link as well. All right. So most importantly, first off, what are impervious surfaces? So they refer to hard surfaces that do not allow water to seep into the ground. The most common impervious surfaces are the ones you see here, driveways, parking lots, roofs, sheds, pavers and walkways that are cemented together, and compacted gravel or solid decks. The graphic on the screen also shows the different in impervious surfaces at the residential scale. So you can see that the driveway and the roof and walkways are labeled impervious. And the main distinction I want to make sure you understand is the difference between the labeling of the deck and the labeling of the patio. The patio is labeled impervious because assumedly it's a concrete or sealed paver patio. Because of the sealed joints between the pavers, it does not allow any water to pass through to infiltrate naturally. On the other hand, the deck, at least as it appears to be depicted on the screen, is an open concept in that there's space between the wood slats or whatever the material is for water to reach the ground below, and therefore is considered a pervious surface in this instance. A swimming pool is also impervious because of the liner of the pools doesn't allow water that is captured to infiltrate. All right, so one aspect that we are focusing on is that the increased impervious surfaces that we are encountering are intensifying the impacts of climate change. And for the purposes of this presentation specifically, I'm focusing on the main aspects that would impact Southborough. There are many other impacts in other parts of the state, especially coastal regions that have other additional impacts like coastal erosion or coastal flooding, dune degradation, etc. But locally, we're dealing with decreased water quality and ecological health. Think of all the debris, contaminants, etc., that are caught on roadways. As you're driving down the street, you look to the side, what do you see? We have leaks from vehicles, we have fertilizer and pesticide runoff, salt and sand, sediment, from trucks or from even just regular vehicle use, trash, and a whole bunch more. All of this, junk essentially that's sitting on this impervious surface during rainstorms, it's often picked up and directly discharged or transported to water bodies and wetlands. And the increased rainfall amounts that we're seeing through these climate change impacts are overloading our existing stormwater infrastructure, and that can allow for more increased direct discharge. Debris also clog the catch basins, which are the grates that you see typically on the sides of the road. And that would typically help filter some of these contaminants out. But because those drains are clogged, it gets carried much farther distances because the impervious surfaces. So do your town DPW a favor, especially during the fall. You get a lot of leaf litter over those grates. Make sure you clear those off so it decreases flooding, and we can treat that stormwater appropriately. Black asphalt and pavement also holds and stores much more heat than a natural landscape. So the increased temperatures that we're having at the surface causes increased localized air and ambient temperatures. And the warmer surfaces, when it does rain, can then warm the rain or storm water, which then is transported to adjacent water bodies, which raises the temperature of the water. So this can cause disruptions to aquatic health, both in species and water quality and reproduction. So you can see it's kind of a cascading effect, especially in Southborough, because we do have such a large water body in which a major route runs directly through. And by increasing the area in which water cannot penetrate, or increasing impervious surfaces, means that there is less water that is naturally infiltrating back into the ground. So not only does that impact groundwater and water balances, but increased rainfall amounts that we're having on these impervious surfaces relates to this decreased recharge, and therefore localized flooding, because water has nowhere to go. And again, if you have questions at any time, please use the raise hand feature, or there's the Q&A chat, and I'm happy to stop and answer any questions. So these are two graphics that show the difference in non-developed and developed site. The graphic on the left is showing a little bit more of an urbanized city than what we would see in Southborough, as it's 75 to 100% impervious, but still relevant. So with natural ground cover, 50% of the water that is hitting the ground is being infiltrated back into the ground in some capacity, and only 10% is running off. In a more urbanized setting, only 15% of water is infiltrating, with 55% runoff rates, which means it does not make it into the ground, and it will sheet flow either to water bodies untreated or cause flooding. Even in Southborough, where this impervious coverage might be half, that's still a substantial increase of the runoff number. There is also other determinations. What I don't kind of get into in this presentation is that different coverage types, from asphalt to highly vegetated forests, do have what we call different curve numbers. So it's their ability to infiltrate water. And every time of cover type is different. So even a meadow might have a different number, that we input to stormwater calculations than a heavily forested area. So that is also an important aspect. And then the graphic to the left is similar, or to the right, I apologize, is similar, but on a more appropriate residential scale. So for new homes, we often lose a bit of that canopy interception that you can see here, especially because a lot of landscaping on the residential scale includes arborvitaes that don't have canopies. And the surface runoff is much larger than pre-existing conditions, because there's no way around building a building without a roof. You need that. You need a road to get to it, a sidewalk, etc. So while these aren't hard numbers, the determinations based off these arrow sizes. So in this pre-development conditions, you got this canopy interception, you've got some bigger shrubs that help soak up that water, and you have a much less surface runoff rate. While in the post-development, you got a lot more open areas, less bigger shrubs, and a lot less canopy interception. So this surface runoff is a lot larger. All right, so getting into the good stuff, what exactly are nature-based solutions? And keeping in mind that this is just Southborough based, so there are a plethora of other nature-based solutions that works in different geographies, topographies, landscapes, etc. So these are really what stay true to Southborough. So nature-based solutions, they use natural systems or mimic natural processes, or they work in tandem with traditional approaches to address natural hazards and promote adaptation and resilience to the impacts of climate change. So they're used to address challenges and to provide a benefit for both human well-being and biodiversity. We still need to function, we still need to get around, but we need to remember, our pollinators and our species that help us survive. So they are used to promote resilience and adaptation while being integrated into communities' built environment. So this is really important to note, because even in urban settings where, things are, what are perceived as completely built out, there are still ideal locations and retrofits that can happen in which these nature-based solutions can be implemented. And they are designed to work in tandem with a successful community that thrives with residential, business, and commercial entities. It's also important to stress that nature-based solutions can work on any scale. They can be larger scale, such as watershed-wide, town-wide, or a collective of adjacent communities, which the MVP also likes to see, that collaboration effort. And on a local scale, it can be used for neighborhoods, or most importantly, at an individual home and property level. So one of the great aspects of nature-based solutions is that they are used to mitigate climate impacts, such as those floodings, erosion, sedimentation, water quality, and those heat island effects that we would see here. All right, so some of the many benefits of nature-based solutions, these are just a very few of them. So we can increase flood storage, which leads to a decrease in localized flooding. This can be done through things such as constructed wetlands, rain gardens, vegetated swales, etc. We can improve water quality health through better infiltration rates, and allowing the ground to filter out contaminants naturally. We can have healthier wildlife habitats, both on land and in the water. Cooler localized temperatures to help combat those rising average temperatures from climate change. And just being able to promote green space so there isn't a heat sink. Added recreational space. Many of the stormwater features or restored floodplains, etc., can be completed in a way that promote passive recreational areas, as they can be made into parks, of varying size. And you avoid a substantial amount of costs by reducing stormwater management costs. So implementation of nature-based solutions have found to be at least 6 times less costly than conventional methods, and become stronger as they go along, comparison to conventional methods that typically degrade. So for example, if you were to plant a rain garden, those plants, as long as you take care of it and you keep on it, they will only grow, have a better root system, absorb more water, and become larger, while the traditional hardscaping methods, you face things such as structural repairs, crumbling, and things that take more technical or physical resources, whether it be a large piece of machinery to clean out something, or a vac truck that maybe the town doesn't have. It also enhances safety by decreasing risk of flood losses, both safety of people out in general, but also flood losses in terms of homes and property. It's often cheaper, as I mentioned before, also just on the annual maintenance side. I saw a couple examples in studies that through the life of a system could save 75% more than a traditional system. So it's a huge thing to think about, as long as you also think about the long-term costs and maintenance of it as well. Hazard resilience, so that we can help to stop the effects of hazards before they happen, and a huge benefit to pollinators and biodiversity health by promoting these native plants and that our native species feed from. So this is a great graphic that's used by a lot of the MVP programming about the various nature-based solutions and their main and co-benefits. So a majority of the main benefits are still environmental, but as you can see, there are still many, many benefits, both socially, culturally, and economically. And this too can be utilized and remains true for these solutions at any scale. So obviously, the larger scale, you can accomplish the more widespread impacts, but the most change for us in Southborough right now would happen at the local homeowner level. And I'll talk about, what those changes would be in a little bit. But like I said, this will be posted on the website, so don't feel like you have to read through real quick. I also have the link to the website at the end to bring you to this page. All right, so let's get into the types of nature-based solutions and really understand what they are. So like I mentioned previously, these can be implemented at any scale. So on the large scale, we have land conservation, wetland restoration and protection, floodplain restoration, river restoration, daylighting streams, many others. But on a smaller scale, which is like a neighborhood or individual homes, we have rain gardens, vegetated swales, permeable pavement, filter strips, pervious pavers, uncemented walkways, rain barrels, green roofs, discharging roof gutters to pervious surfaces, etc. And, a couple of these that are listed are more on the neighborhood scale when implementing new subdivisions. So we have, the constructed wetlands or the specific infiltration and detention basins. Let's see. So on a fundamental scale, we are trying to take existing common forms of stormwater management, as they're primarily thought of right now, and we're going back to the basics. We want to take things from nature and arrange them in a way that mimic those natural functions, but in an environment in a controlled and planned way. So instead of piping stormwater through feet or even miles of pipe, we're now trying to mimic that environmental systems to deal with the stormwater in the same location without that hardscaping. So this graphic right here is more of a neighborhood or maybe commercial sized rain garden. You can see it has this little inlet, and that should always be grassed. It can be stone lined just to make sure it channelizes, but the base should not be pavement. And then we have the grading of gravel, and appropriate soil to allow that infiltration to peter out at a sustainable rate. And it does say optional underdrain. So, sometimes in these large situations where we get a lot of rainfall, these rain gardens can fill up. So sometimes there is an overflow inlet or maybe a little spillway like seen over here. One of the kind of differences is this inlet, the outflow is often still infiltrated into the ground, so it still can filter out a little bit better. But this overflow spillway, usually kind of spills out into a more even surface, so the excess water capacity can be filtered out that way. So how can we implement these nature-based solutions as a town? There are three phrases that are common within the MVP program in terms of these nature-based solutions, and they are conserve, integrate, and restore. So we want to conserve the natural areas we have. We want to integrate these nature-based solutions and essentially restore our ecological functions to combat the impacts of climate change. As a town, we can incentivize or even revisit our existing low impact development or LID bylaw to better require new designs, especially commercial, to include nature-based solutions. We could create an impervious surfaces mitigation plan to identify areas, both town and privately owned, that we could work towards reducing impervious surfaces on. We could create a forest management plan, and that relates to that canopy coverage and water cycle balances. Other bylaw reviews, such as our stormwater management bylaw, which the Conservation Commission is currently reviewing for changes. Public education is extremely important because changes on a town scale will most likely need to go through town meeting vote prior to get funding approval. So without voters really understanding the benefits and cost savings, these approvals may not happen. We also want to work with Mass DOT to implement these nature-based solutions along Route 9. As I'm sure a lot of you know, especially if you live in town, Route 9 runs through the reservoir, and this is called out as a high priority item within the Conservation Commission and also the MVP program, because a lot of Route 9 right now, even though it was just kind of repaved a couple years ago and updated a little bit, is still straight sheet flow into the reservoir. So we really want to be able to see if there are other options that we can implement, along one of our most important resources. And we can tie in with bylaw review, incorporate better requirements into our stormwater management permits, and promote land conservation, both town and privately owned. One thing that we do need to balance is the economic growth that we need and are seeking in town. So land conservation doesn't always mean the stopping of development, which is a common misconception, but the preservation of those prime areas that we have identified, and being inventive in the trade-offs that we may permit for certain developments to preserve that open space. And and later in some of the commercial examples, that we kind of discuss some of the trade-offs that get there. All right. There we go. So how, as a homeowner, do these impact you? How do you do these on a homeowner scale? So one thing I always recommend when talking to homeowners, whether it be wetland permitting, or just site maintenance, etc., is what are your plans for your property over the next 5 years? Do you plan on putting in a pool or a shed? Because we're not necessarily telling you that right this second you should rip out all your impervious surfaces. But if you're repaving your driveway in the future, maybe you should consider some of these greener alternatives. So some of these easy tasks that you can do quickly and do them now. And not only are they nature-based solutions, but also mitigating the impact of impervious surfaces, is you can divert your downspouts that are connected to your roof gutters to pervious surfaces, or better yet, plant and put your gutters to the rain garden. Pick up pet waste and plant your rain gardens with native plants especially. Reduce, limit, or better yet, eliminate the use of fertilizer or pesticide use. We recommend, if using a fertilizer for our wetland permits, we're required actually to use an organic, slow release kind. You can reduce lawn watering and mowing. Many people participate in No Mow May, and dispose of leaf litter and compost properly. This is especially important for properties that border wetland resources, because it's very, very common to throw lawn clippings and yard waste, over your fence where you can't see it. And a lot of times they end up in a wetland resource area. And over time, sometimes even just a few years, 3, that lawn waste can fill a wetland and limit its flood storage capacity, cause some flooding in your backyard, or just impact the health of the system. All right. I think I missed a couple, sorry guys. And then long-term changes, like I said, if you're considering putting in a new driveway, consider some pervious pavement, or would you consider maybe putting in a paver driveway or a cobblestone driveway without kind of cementing the joints? There's a kind of sand you can fill in that's a little bit more pervious, but consider those greener alternatives, and change your lawn to native plants. This can be done slowly over time. You can start letting an area vegetate naturally, or for the last 2 years, the Open Space Preservation Commission has been offering a free program called the Winter Sow, in which you can order free seeds from a set list, which seeds have been collected locally, with many coming from Breakneck Hill Conservation Land. And come next spring or summer, you can have a plethora of native pollinator-loving plants that you can put in your yard. All right, so now commercially, how can we do this on the commercial scale? First and foremost, If you have some flooding within the property, consider installing rain gardens to help with that groundwater recharge over, putting in kind of area drains. This is much more impactful in the long run. It helps to filter, and it's allowing it to go at the rate that it's supposed to. Review parking requirements. Do you have way too many spaces available? Maybe talk to the planning board and ask about a parking waiver. Limit hardscaping, change or install pathways around buildings to pervious materials, and include native plants. Seek out, and especially in design, first and foremost during those designs, you should be prioritizing these nature-based solutions. If you have an existing facility, seek out priority pollutant reduction opportunities. Do you have a fueling station? Do you store materials that have a safety data sheet? If so, you should review those materials for compliance and make sure they're stored properly. Ensure you are complying with your operation and maintenance plan for stormwater systems. So this includes sweeping of parking lots, catch basin cleanouts, cleaning of detention basin, replacing dead plant materials in rain gardens, etc. And again, reduce and limit or eliminate the use of fertilizer and pesticide use. So I'm just going to pause really quickly because I saw a couple chats and a comment. So one question is, are the projects that would be scaled to a residence feasible for DIY, and would there be permitting required? So there are definitely projects that are on a scale that is residential. Rain gardens don't have to be large features. They can just hold a very small number of plants, in a cluster kind of type development. And depending on the location would determine if there's permitting required, and that's mainly in terms of adjacent to wetland resources. So if you're next to a stream or a wetland and you're doing some mitigation, you're removing some invasive plants, or you're removing some of that hardscaping, you will most likely need a wetlands permit from the Conservation Commission. If you're just kind of, going in your front lawn and doing some landscaping, feel free to always reach out to me through the conservation to just make sure that there aren't any wetlands adjacent to you. But we do kind of prioritize and have some administrative exemptions for the installation of native plants as well. So it's definitely something that as a commission on the wetland side, we're working on, making it easier for people to implement these aspects. All right. We also, preserving streams, wetlands, and upland buffers are also great for a small scale neighborhood home development. So yeah, even just, keeping to our 20-foot no-touch bylaw, wetlands bylaw, is a huge way that we can help preserve streams and those buffers. The most area that you can give that is natural between your maintained area in those wetland resources, the better. But there are ways to make it pretty with native plants. All right, so I'm going to move on to a couple of maps that we had made through the MVP planning process. So these next 3 slides are maps that were created by Par Corporation during the MVP planning process, and they were extremely useful to demonstrate the areas that were raised as containing some localized flooding, but also all of our stormwater outfalls, which are these purple dots. So a large portion of these outfalls, which hopefully you can see, are adjacent to water resource areas. So this really stresses the importance in Southborough of trying to limit the contaminants from reaching these areas and mitigating those impacts of impervious surfaces, especially as it relates to stormwater runoff, water quality, and ecologic health of the systems it discharges to. And these series of maps, I only have 3 in here, but there's a whole slew, is at that end of that summary of findings that's linked on the Conservation Commission page. So feel free to head there. There's a great all series of maps for all Southborough. This one is showing the density of development as the current use is in 2020 when this was created. So as a standard, we kind of have that cluster development, around these subdivisions. If you open this on your own time at home, you can zoom in and really see that there are streets around here. And even already, you can see there is fragmented habitat in terms of the ability for a species to move from one area to another safely, but also to be able to move with enough appropriate food sources. Especially down towards the south of town, because we have Route 9, we have the Mass Pike, and a lot of cluster development, that it can be difficult. There's not good wildlife corridors. And then the next slide that we're going to show is what this would look like in 2060. So I'm going to scroll back and forth, a couple times just so you can see the difference. So this is 2020. And that increased red in 2060. So we have a lot more red kind of consistently throughout the town. And it would most likely be residential build out. So there is a chance to educate the public now so that even with this growth that we may face, we have a better grasp on the interactions it has with the impacts from climate change and understanding, how we can become more resilient as a community. It's also important to think about while looking at all this red is that while rainfall amounts continue to increase, so will impervious surfaces. Even if it's just roofs, driveways, sheds, and pools. So where is that water going to go? We will need to update town infrastructure. And if the cost benefits can be 6 times less than the traditional methods, then we should be considering now and implementing the changes that we can do now to better prepare for the future. So again, this is 2020. We have a lot more, it's unprotected forest, whether it's just backyards or just larger parcels. One thing that we've really been also looking at recently is that in the future, the trend seems to be that the new house lots may not be larger residential subdivisions, but will be larger parcels with maybe older homes that are ripped down and separated as A&R lots. So essentially, they'd have existing frontage. So we really need to consider, even just case by case, but as a holistic view, and better prepare on the build out that we could see, if it's coming, that we need to better prepare for that. So to the fun part, some commercial examples. So the 2 commercial I have is 156 Northborough Road, and this is a contractor bay. These will include rain gardens with native plants, some pervious pavement, and some roof downspouts to pervious areas. I will preface both of these cases are either in the works or need to be finished. In case of Northborough Road, they have some plants to replace. So keep that in mind. And then the second I'm going to show is Ken's Food, which is at 325 Turnpike Road. They have pervious pavement, native plants, some wetland restoration areas, and a naturalized detention pond or bioretention area. So here are some pictures from 156 Northborough Road. So this bottom photo, you can see kind of where the saw cut line is. So this darker pavement is all pervious pavement. And one thing that I did learn recently from some other discussions is that they're finding that pervious pavement is ideally more applicable in the travel lanes versus in parking lanes. And this is because some of the pervious pavement can't take the friction of the tire turning without moving. It kind of, degrades and erodes the surface. But you also want to be careful in New England because you can't sand it like you would a normal road. It will fill in the pervious areas and essentially become impervious. So you want to make sure that it's in a place where, it is still safe for passage, and you need to take into consideration the traffic that would be happening there. Up in the top here, we have that roof downspout. It's got a little bit of riprap, and then it's leading into the rain garden and naturalized areas. These are some other pictures of those rain gardens. So this is Northborough Road right here. If you've ever gone by this building, it's a nice long building. So there's actually 4 separate rain gardens that have been installed with native plants. Again, some tweaks need to happen before this permit is officially closed out. But this, is kind of what we're looking for. And in this circumstance, the town actually allowed them to do some work in the road right of way to be able to implement this nature-based solution. So there are ways to better incentivize and allow these types of solutions to happen in a normal environment on a commercial site. So here's just some more, the whole front of the building has these riprap channels coming from the gutters, all leading into these rain gardens. And also you can I'm on the ledge of one of these rain gardens, but they have this inlet. So if it does overflow, it won't spill off into the road. We'll be able to deal with it on site. And there are 4 separate, so this is kind of the depressed area, rises up, and then there's 4 separate kind of depressed rain gardens, and not depressed as in sad. All right. So this is 325 Turnpike, or Ken's Foods. This is that constructed wetlands or bioretention area. This is towards the Deerfoot Road side. This is the emergency access. It is teeming with wildlife. There's plenty of frogs and salamanders out there when I was out there this week. This is just it from another view. We've got some cattails. In their most recent application, they will be adding more native plants around this area to help increase some biodiversity. And then here's some other pictures. So this is the emergency access road around the building that is only used, in an event of an emergency if a fire truck needs to come in or out. So right here is kind of where the saw cut is, and it wraps around. So they need to be especially careful, and it's outlined in their operation and maintenance plan that they can't sand this area. It's plowing only. In their most recent application, they're going to be doing an addition over this area right here. So this whole area will essentially be moving off to the left here, but it still will remain pervious pavement, and there'll actually be a little bit more of it. In the bottom left, this is a picture of kind of what their existing what's supposed to be kind of meadow grass area. And this is where the new addition is going to be going. So in response to that, another unique situation of this property is that it has very high groundwater. So something that both the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission has been looking at is how do we offset the impacts of this additional impervious surface from the 50,000 square foot warehouse addition with the high groundwater, because it's very difficult to attenuate that. So this is a picture from today of what Ken's Foods looks like now. And this is, if you're looking at the building, it's off to the right. So this is going to be immediately adjacent of where the new addition is going to be. And this is going to be filled with a plethora, and we're working, and the Open Space Preservation Commission is working with the applicants to try and get, as much native plants as possible, especially those that are on Dr. Gigier's list, to attract pollinators that are in decline. So they've been very amenable in working with us to highlight some of these areas that can help both the wetland health and also just the pollinator and basic biodiversity. Because right now it is just maintained grass. It's even irrigated, which is crazy because it's very wet. So this will also be filled with a number of shrubs and larger trees or larger shrubs, because those larger shrubs help have those bigger roots that help soak up a lot of that water. So to help as mitigation for the additional impervious, they are implementing kind of this nature-based solution of buffer zone restoration and wetland management. So we hope to see a good outcome of that. This is they're not, these are two kind of cross sections of plans. These aren't finalized quite yet. So this is where that meadow area that I was showing you is, and this is going to be where the new addition is. So this is that access road. So it's going to have impervious pavement all the way around here. And then in this light green section, or in the dark green section. So that's going to be some of that enhanced buffer zone planting plan with 100% native plants, woody shrubs, and we're finalizing the final makeup of what that would look like in conjunction with the Open Space Preservation Commission and their initiatives. So we've got a lot of areas. We have 7,700 square feet here. We've got another 12,500 square feet of riverfront restoration, mostly comprising of large native trees and woody shrubs. And again, final design to be determined. These plantings are actually going to be going around where that construction bioretention area is. So we're going to have some better plants around there that really make it more of a benefit and get more away from that maintained lawn. So as you know, part of the problem with the high groundwater here is that there's always going to be water in this bioretention area, and that's okay. So we kind of want to use it as a constructed wetland. So we want to protect it, and we want to make sure that the quality and the health of it remains so that the functionality and the flood storage capability stays consistent. All right, some residential examples. First and foremost, thank you to Joyce Greenleaf, who provided this picture of her lovely, lovely yard. She's the chair of the stewardship committee. And this was the perfect example of what I'm talking about on a residential scale. She's got this rock wall, which looks like cemented on the top, but still allows some of that water to come through. We've got this nice gravel walkway, so not pavement or pervious, or it is pervious. And we've got a plethora of native plants. We've got some black-eyed Susan, some eastern prickly pear, which is also right here, Joe Pye weed, milkweed, and much more. And this also goes to show, that a common other misconception is that native plants are pretty. And they're very pretty, especially if you can look at a list that we commonly refer to from Dr. Gear. They outline the bloom times as well, which is really beneficial and useful when you're trying to kind of put together your garden, because you can try and have something that blooms every season of the year, so you keep getting that color. There are a lot of options available for color, so don't feel like you need to go to the cultivar version. And that cultivar version usually has some common name in quotations. So if you just see kind of a straight name, no quotation, no common language, no common English language, essentially, then you are getting, hopefully, a native straight species. But yes, Joyce, phenomenal job, and thank you. Some other residential examples. So this is on Leeds Way. I almost didn't include this picture because this is what it looked like last week. You can see maybe some of the plants have died. There's a basketball and some other trash, but it's also important to understand that these things do need maintenance as well. If plants are dying, and this is a rain garden, there are several, I think there are 3 throughout the community in which stormwater is relayed to. So there's no kind of formal infiltration basin. There's no Coltec or underground chamber units. It's all roadside swales, vegetated swales. We have these rain gardens next to homes, and they have applicable and appropriate operation and maintenance plans. So, even though this looks a little messy, it's still functioning, but it would need some additional replacement of plants and maybe clean out of trash. So it is important to understand that, these aren't perfect in every way, but they definitely provide a much better benefit. And this is the Pollination Preservation Garden at the library. The Open Space Preservation Commission has done a great job implementing, a slew of these, but this is really a great educational resource tool to show people that it is doable. This is 1 year old, so to have kind of this success is really great. You can also see here that this is that catch basin that I was talking about earlier. That orange around it, it's called the silt sack. It's only because they're still doing some weeding and finalizing, so they want to make sure that that dirt doesn't get down that stormwater system. And when everything's said and done, that will come out. But this allows them to, address an issue. There was when they were kind of working in there, they realized that this was kind of a stormwater feature in here. So that it does get water, it can flood out at certain times. But this allowed them to have kind of a mix of those wet loving plants, but also the dry. So this is kind of that natural swale that's leading up to there. You have this rock wall that's uncemented, so water can filter through. And these are some other pictures. This is one with a little bumblebee hanging out, little bumblebutt. And this is the garden that's next to them for alternatives to native ground cover. So, some here, just some pretty pictures of plants. And this is just their kind of natural walkway through. So, didn't need to pave it, didn't need to compact anything. And it's a great resource. So if you want to learn more about some of these pollination rain gardens, a shameless plug is some upcoming events. So volunteers are needed this weekend for some pollination preservation garden at Beals Preserve. So this Saturday at 9 a.m. for soil prep, and Sunday at noon for planting. Come for an hour, come for several hours. They'll take all the help they can get. This is done through the Open Space Preservation Commission in partnership with the Southborough Open Land Foundation. Bring gloves, hats, sunscreen, etc. If you do plan to attend, please email Freddie Gillespie at this email, ospcnativeplantspolinators@gmail.com. And they're also having a garden tour. They're going to tour the 2 pollinator gardens that we have in town. So on Saturday, June 25th, beginning at 10 a.m., head to the library, which were those pictures that I was just showing you. And they will, walk you through that. And then afterwards, they're going to be heading to the Beals Preserve. So park on Main Street across from Northborough Road. So those are some great upcoming events if you want to get incorporated into some of the native plant aspects and really learn more about the benefits of those. But otherwise, I will take questions. And if you have any questions, this is my contact information. And here are some just very quick 3 useful resources. So this is the Conservation Commission's page where that MVP summary of findings is held. This is the state page for that MVP program. They have an amazing array of all of the projects that they have approved in case studies throughout Massachusetts to understand kind of the complexity and the range of projects that this MVP program promotes. And, you can see what other towns are doing, what's been approved, even getting some ideas on funding and costs, and, kind of the validation that, yes, you are on the right track. And this is the Resilient MA link that had that great nature-based solution matrix, and also kind of the framework of the MVP planning process. So that is all that I have for you tonight. I don't think I see any outstanding questions in the chat or the Q&A, but if you have any questions, I'm going to hang around for a couple minutes. Feel free to use the raise hand feature, and I'm happy to have a chat with you. And thank you all for attending. It was a beautiful day, so I really appreciate you putting away this hour to learn a little more about nature-based solutions in town. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. right, everyone, I am going to head out, but please feel free to send me an email if you have any questions, and have a